There's so many different variables here in Southeast Texas that we have kind of going against us when it comes to flooding. And one is our landscape. We're relatively flat. It's not necessarily swampy now, but 115, 20 years ago it was pretty swampy here. And so we built on top of very flat, what used to be flat marshy ground where the water wanted to sit. It didn't want to run off.
So I moved to the Houston area in late 2013, and since then we've had 4 major flood events. And that was the Memorial Day flood in 2015, the Tax Day flood in 2016, of course there was Harvey in 2017, and then Imelda in 2019. As an up-and-coming meteorologist, I find this to be both fascinating, but also a bit troubling.
The population growth, though, the footprint out on areas that are subject to flooding has gotten much, much bigger. So when we do have a flood, the impacts are much, much greater than they were decades ago.
Harvey is what a lot of people remember because it was a big-time, major news-making event, and it was just a few short years ago. But let's not forget, back in 2001, very slow-moving tropical storm Allison dropped a tremendous amount of rainfall on the Houston area, causing significant flooding.
And I remember I was a forecaster at San Antonio. We were responsible for this area then. I remember we talking at length with our hydrology types and like that. What's going to happen someday when one of these decaying tropical storms stalls over an urban center? And that was Allison. Allison gave us the glimpse in the liquid Armageddon, if you will, with a big rain producer.
My first real experience with flooding in the Houston area was back in 2015 when the remnants of eastern Pacific Hurricane Patricia were forecast to move across Mexico and bring a high-impact flood event to parts of southeast Texas. What we wanted to do during this potential flood event was to test out our second generation of unmanned camera systems, and we were going to use this flood threat to do that. In fact, we coordinated with the Harris County Flood Control District, local media, and the National Weather Service to do all of this, trying to understand where in the Houston area we could set some equipment up and use this event to test the durability and the feasibility of using these smaller, more robust unmanned cameras for future hurricane work. In March of 2016, a tremendous amount of rain had fallen upstream along the Sabine River Basin in the Toledo Bend Reservoir area, and that was going to send a huge flood wave down into this very small town in southeast Texas called Deweyville. I worked with Carrie to go out into Deweyville and place 2 of these cameras using Google Street View to know exactly where we were going to put them. I also coordinated with the National Weather Service out of Lake Charles, Louisiana. It proved that covering freshwater flooding, which obviously does happen during tropical cyclone events, is definitely a worthy cause and something that we would be doing in the future.
Addicks and Barker Reservoirs are in the western part of Harris County, and they were developed back in the 1940s as part of a larger Corps of Engineers flood control plan for the county. So this came after devastating floods in 1929 and 1935 in downtown Houston. The water went to the second and third stories of the buildings in downtown Houston. And so, the founders of Houston at the time and the political influences at the time pushed the Corps of Engineers to do these massive flood control measures. And since these are flood control reservoirs, which is a difference from a water supply reservoir, the flood control reservoir, the purpose is to protect downstream development. So that's the development along Buffalo Bayou and downtown Houston and the Houston Ship Channel eventually.
These flood pools, as they are often called, were put to the test in a big way in the spring of 2016 when a large complex of thunderstorms developed over the Houston area during the weekend leading up to Tax Day.
The Tax Day flood in April 2016 was triggered by exceptionally high precipitable water values. And as a result, very heavy rain fell from intense thunderstorms all over Harris County and parts of the Houston area.
And so when you're dealing with those types of rainfall rates, 2, 3, 4 inches an hour, and you continue that for hours and hours and hours, you can really build up these big rainfall totals, 10, 15, 20 inches of rain.
Once again, I worked with Carrie to set up equipment. This time out along what is called South Maid Creek, near the Katy area in Texas. This creek is known to flood. And it was very interesting because we were able to watch the flooding as it happened at night using the lightning flashes and just taking screen grabs when that would happen. And then we would send that to the local media, to Jeff at the Harris County Flood Control District. It was a very unique way to keep tabs on what was happening during that record flood event.
I kind of use New Orleans as an example, not because we're significantly different from New Orleans, but New Orleans is protected by a levee system that protects them from storm surge flooding. And it's the same thing here. You build everything to a design. So there they have a design level that they build their levees to and maintain their levees to. And we did the same thing here. We have our flood control measures and our bayous and creeks that we build to a certain level. But there's always that storm out there that can exceed those designs.
I attended a lecture once by one of the former astronauts that was showing pictures, and it actually, physically, it's an old river delta, the land that sits in here. So it's not really a swamp so much as a river delta. He affectionately called it Bangladesh with money.
Harvey will forever be etched in my mind as one of the most impactful events that I've ever witnessed, and it was not because of the initial Category 4 landfall along the coast.
One of the misnomers people have that don't deal with this stuff day in and day out is that you have to have a big honking hurricane to get these heavy rains. And the truth of the matter is there's no correlation between the intensity of the storm and how much rain you get.
The Houston area was under siege from this truly historic flood event, and there I was right in the middle of it trying to set up these live cams to monitor what was going on. Truly a daunting task considering how many roads were flooded, becoming flooded faster and faster, many of them becoming impassable.
I mean, now we've had a couple of non-tropical events, and the Memorial Day and the Tax Day floods there in the mid 20-teens, and then it culminated with Harvey being the mother of all big tropical rains that eclipse anything any of us have ever seen, and there's nothing we can find even in the colonial times anecdotally that would come close to matching what Harvey produced.
I mean, we knew this was going to be a 20-inch rain. And then 2 days out, you know, now you're talking 35, 40 inches. And you know, we throw these numbers around, but we're talking big numbers. I mean, we're talking numbers none of us have ever predicted before, anywhere. And so to kind of wrap your head around that, but we had nearly unanimous model support for that. Almost all the global models were all on the same page with these big totals, the stalling of the system and all that. Now, 2 years later with Imelda is a little bit of a different story.
A small, rather innocuous area of low pressure looked like it might develop off the coast of Texas at the end of September. The National Hurricane Center basically gave it low probabilities of development, but I just had this hunch that this was going to be a bigger deal than anybody was really giving it credit for at the time. So I hopped a plane to Houston, took some gear with me, and promptly got to work. It's 4:23 in Houston. I'm in Houston, Texas. Tropical storm Imelda formed today, right off the coast. It's moved inland. Now I am in Houston, and this area could get some serious flooding.
With Imelda was really shaping up to be what I consider our normal Western Gulf of Mexico typical flood. And it's a point. It's a small area that gets a big rain.
I wanted to do something really different for this event, so I had brought with me one of these barrier clamp devices that was gifted to our project by one of our partners. And the idea was to take a camera, one of our camera boxes, and attach it to this device, and then put the whole thing out right on the middle of Interstate 10. And I mean right in the middle of the interstate, right on the center divider.
This piece of equipment.
Todd and I worked to get this thing ready. We stopped at a filling station and used the canopy there to keep us dry.
Put cameras on it, mount it to the barriers that go between the lanes in a highway, freeway, interstate, whatever. And we can locate that just about anywhere that we need it to be.
And we got this thing up and running and drove it out off of one of the exits there along I-10. near Baytown, and it didn't take long. We waited till the traffic died down, walked the device out there, clamped it to the center divider. But what was really neat about it, and what was so different, is that we were going to be able to immerse the viewers of this camera right in the middle of the action, right there in the middle of the interstate, as traffic was going by 60, 70 miles per hour. All of this while the effects of Imelda moved in. So during my first full day in southeast Texas, the area is under a flood watch. Everybody's on edge. They remember what happened in Harvey, the Tax Day flood, the Memorial Day flood. They know what could happen. I decided to head over into southwest Louisiana and just kind of chase these rain bands, if you will. I could watch them very easily using radar scope, and sometimes these rain bands will produce tornadoes. You never know when that might happen. But also, every one of these events is an opportunity to kind of get the lay of the land, because you never know, and in the case of southwest Louisiana, when there might be an opportunity that we could learn from this event and how it might apply to something in the future. I was over on Bolivar Peninsula after coming out of southwest Louisiana earlier in the day, just kind of making my way over to Galveston. I was going to get on the ferry from Bolivar to Galveston and head back into Galveston and eventually make my way up to Houston for the evening, when all of a sudden my radar scope lit up, my phone lit up. A tornado warning had been issued not far from Baytown, kind of close to where Todd and I had the camera set up there on I-10. Now, from what we can tell, looking at the video from the unmanned camera, we didn't capture the tornado, but the parent thunderstorm that caused the tornado warning passed very close to that location near Baytown and Mont Belvieu, and it just goes to show that you never know what we might capture with one of these unmanned cameras. It is 8:30 in the morning. I'm on the east side of Houston, and it looks like it's nighttime, like evening. Massive line of storms with torrential rain, frequent lightning, flash flood emergencies going on to my east and east-northeast. Recalling my experience with Harvey 2 years ago, there was so much lightning during those really intense rain bands, and now this, what I was seeing with Imelda, really brought back the memories of those extreme rainfall rates. And now Imelda is stuck over southeast Texas. It remains convectively active, meaning that it is still capable of producing heavy thunderstorm activity. And once again, it led to another big rainfall event and a lot of flooding, but at least this time, it did not impact as large of an area.
And that's typically, if you look back historically here in Texas about how things work, it's typically like that. A small location will get a huge amount of rain. 15 miles away, you might not get anything.
That is exactly what happened with Imelda. A large complex of thunderstorms developed in the overnight hours of the 18th into the 19th. It had moved generally to the southeast over into more of the rural parts of southeast Harris County, out into Chambers and Jefferson towards Beaumont. And again, we saw some huge rain amounts in excess of 20 inches in some areas. Businesses starting to flood, the roads starting to flood. Definitely bringing back those painful memories from Hurricane Harvey just 2 years prior.
But I think as you move away from any storm, like you move away from Harvey, and in New Orleans you move away from Katrina, or you move away from Andrew in South Florida, your population changes out, people move in, move out of the area. It's kind of like you have to stick with it. It's out of sight, it's out of mind. We're coming up on 3 years since Harvey happened, and for a lot of people, if it didn't affect you, you've moved on. There's other things more important now. And then do we have the will as a public to go through the hardships that we'd have to go through? Well, we can build 100-year protection in Harris County. We can do it. We can do it. It's about $38 billion. Well, here we are, it's mid-October, and at least this time,
It looks like we're not going to have a repeat of Hurricane Michael from a year earlier, but we do have to deal with another tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico during the month of October. This time, its name was Nestor. All right, a little after 10 o'clock in the morning on Friday, October 18th, and I just got into Cedar Key. Familiar area, huh? My first experience with a tropical system in Cedar Key was Hurricane Gordon back in 2000. The hurricane was moving into the region, weakening as it made landfall near Cedar Key. I was down there with the green Isuzu Rodeo, my first vehicle. It had a weather station on the top, so I was able to monitor wind readings and pressure readings in real time. I even took a camera system with me that I put together. I took an old scuba diving housing and put the video camera inside of it, mainly just to keep the camera safe and dry and film what was going on as the remnants of Gordon, what was once a hurricane, moved into Cedar Key. Well, the most impactful hurricane that we've ever documented in the Cedar Key area was Hermine in 2016. Quite a difference from what we saw in 2000 when Hurricane Gordon went through. This time for Hermine, we had a remote camera box mounted on the utility pole there to give us a view of what was happening, capturing a record storm surge, and then of course that dramatic moment that the very large piece of deck had kind of floated through, knocked the fence over, and then eventually ran into the camera box itself. All right, here we are, Cedar Key. Beautiful area. And what I'm thinking is to set up a GoPro on one of these facing back towards that way. This time I was going to have some help. A young man came up from Venice, Florida. His name is CJ. He's one of our crowdfunding supporters on Patreon. He was available that day, so I figured, yeah, come on up. It's not too big of an impact event. And he gave me a hand to set up some of the equipment.
When I found out that Mark was coming down to set up cams for Tropical Storm Nestor, I was really excited, and I offered my help because A, I'm a weather freak, B, I'm a former meteorology major, and C, after living here for 4.5 years, I know this coastline pretty well, so I figured that experience and that knowledge would be an asset to Mark.
All right, start time is 10:40 a.m. Eastern Time, Friday, October 18th.
The cam shot was supposed to be facing the boat launch ramp as well as a couple of restaurants that were right on the water.
All right, here we go.
After we got the first ratchet strap around the piling, it came loose and the cam dropped straight into the Gulf. Both of us just kind of looked at each other and then looked down as the camera was bobbing away in the current.
Well, at least it showed us that these cases are in fact airtight. It took a few minutes, but it floated over to where I could pick it up there next to the boat ramp. CJ helped me to get it mounted, and we got the live cam going in what has become a very familiar spot here, kind of our go-to location there in Cedar Key. Interestingly enough, there was some kind of a festival taking place in the Cedar Key area that weekend. Obviously not the ideal time to be having a tropical storm threat. I think most of the people there were probably not very aware of it. At least it was not a hurricane threat coming like we saw a year before. And for the most part, the impacts were not enough to disrupt what they were doing, and they certainly had a great weekend.
So not every October hurricane is going to be as strong as Michael. A more typical system is like we saw with Tropical Storm Nestor that struck the Florida Gulf Coast. This was a much weaker storm owing to cooler water temperatures near shore, a little bit stronger wind shear. So in the case of Nestor, we saw a disorganized storm with most of the effects on the east side.
As it turned out, Nestor was not much more than a nuisance for the region, but you know what? It doesn't matter to me. This is my job. This is what I do. Every one of these is a chance to practice, try new things, and get to know the area even better for when a really bad hurricane comes knocking. And at least then, my team and I know exactly how to approach the situation. It was now autumn. the threat from hurricanes was diminishing. Our attention would now shift to watching for coastal storms and the potential for Brent to take on a typhoon in the western Pacific. It had been quite a year for us along the Hurricane Highway, but we still had a ways to go.